Okay, well, here we are, September 27th, 2022. I'm Larissa. While I am waiting to get my rug out of the dryer here at the laundromat, I'm going to read Josef Pieper's Abusive Language, Abusive Power, Part 2, Knowledge and Freedom. The expression science and freedom, as used here and now, has a certain opposition in mind. It aims at an opponent who not only denies the freedom of science in theory, but also threatens, limits, and destroys this freedom in practice. In order to discuss this antagonistic situation with rational arguments and not simply to offer a demonstration, the ambiguity of this term demonstration intimately relates to our topic. We have to comprehend clearly the opposing position, not only in its actual appearance, but also in its roots. Only then will it become clear of what kind and what substance the one counter-argument has to be, an argument that alone would be adequate to address and disapprove the innermost conviction of the opponent. This is not meant to sound simply like a general or purely academic reflection, the way it may appear at first. The critical literature on the totalitarian workers' state, right from the beginning, has said it again and again that it is not at all some suddenly appearing oddity, but rather that it fundamentally expresses openly what traditional society itself holds as a secret and hidden view. For example, the overriding and absolute concern with economic issues that the East has given form and reality to what the West in truth is thinking, that we, in our justified struggle against the Soviet slave state, are handicapped by one thing, namely by the very same tendencies in our own society. These are three ideas chosen at random from a historico-critical volume on the Soviet workers' state, from a prisoner's report, and from a polemical pamphlet on freedom. No doubt, we are dealing here with rather overwrought formulations. Still, they bring home the fact that any rational discussion of the Soviet regime will have to consider a somewhat complicated situation. It might happen, for example, that unexpectedly you feel forced, if you want to disapprove your opponent, to revise your own premises. An experience of this kind, I think, is indeed waiting for those who set out to analyze the enslavement of science by the totalitarian workers' state. To be more specific, those who try to argue against this enslavement, through which the freedom of science is compromised, will have to face some arguments that can be overcome only by correcting certain notions commonly and for a long time, even for centuries, accepted by Western civilization. When we say argue, we do not mean political struggle or active or passive resistance, but rational discussion only. Those notions to be corrected contradict certain views up till now unchallenged in the Western world. They are in conflict, that is, with thoughts not only of the great teachers of Christianity, Augustine, no less than Aquinas, but also of Plato and Aristotle. Those ancient and these modern views both quite specifically speak to our topic here, namely the nature of knowledge as such and the relationship between knowledge and freedom. My thesis here in positive terms is this: the decay of the freedom of science as it occurs in the totalitarian worker state can be adequately counteracted in the area of rational argumentation only through the restoration of certain fundamental insights that have their origin in the pre-modern tradition of Western culture. These insights shall be discussed here, though perforce in summary terms only. One of them, the most important, is found in Aristotle's Metaphysics. The first page of this book, we may be justified to see it in one of the canonical texts of the Western mind, already mention the freedom of knowledge. But let us be more precise. What is discussed there is a specific knowledge, a specific search for cognition, and a specific attempt to gain knowledge, the one that among all the others is supremely free, the one, even that alone can be called free, and obviously so. This would be a knowledge that has as its object the whole of reality, the fundamental reasons of all that is, a knowledge driven by the question as to the essence and the being of all that exists, absolutely and ultimately, a knowledge attempted when the innermost core of the human spirit directs all power of cognition towards the totality of all things, toward the roots and reasons of reality as such, which means when the power of cognition reaches out to its most adequate and complete unlimited object. We are talking here about knowledge pure and absolute, not confined to any individual object, and yet in its dynamism embracing all individual acts of cognition that reach out to some specific and concrete object or aspect of reality, including, not least, the so-called scientific knowledge. In short, we are talking here about that kind of knowledge called by Aristotle the most authentically philosophic. It should also appear that we are not talking about something isolated and metaphysical. Aristotle himself is well known, neither knows nor uses the term at all. We are dealing here with the intrinsic power of cognition. As such, the power moving within all concrete experiences and insights and giving them consistency and unity as it is oriented towards its proper object, the totality of all that is. Gegenstand im Ganzen. It is this kind of knowledge that Aristotle declares alone truly free. The question arises, what does free mean here? We have reached, indeed, the critical and decisive point of our problem. Free, says Aristotle, expressing, we think, a very ancient view, for instance, formulated also by his teacher, Plato, and later dominating the entire Western way of thinking, means the same here as non-practical. Praxis means the achievement of purposes. Whatever serves its purpose is practical. That kind of knowledge, however, that is oriented toward the fundamental reasons of the world, and such knowledge alone does not serve any purpose, so he affirms. It would even be impossible and unthinkable to employ it for any practical use at all, for its reason to be lies entirely in itself. To exist not in dependence on anything without, but by and for reasons entirely within. This is precisely what human language calls freedom. This incredibly concise paragraph of Aristotle's Metaphysics, just 20-some lines, lists, however, some further characteristics of that free and non-practical knowledge, not to be omitted here. Aristotle adds this: knowledge that envisions the totality of all there is, proceeding by and for its own inherent reasons, and thus truly free. Such knowledge can never be achieved completely and perfectly by any human being. It is never fully at the disposal of man. It is, therefore, not something entirely within the human sphere, since human existence itself is subject and beholden to many and various needs and wants. One would have to say, according to Aristotle, that God alone could possess such knowledge in a perfect degree, it being oriented towards the divine root in all things anyway. This is the very reason why no other science could claim the same eminence and dignity as the philosophical endeavor, although all of them are of greater necessity. Necessaries homines, dignuar nulla, as the Latin of the Versio Antiqua has it. So says Aristotle. In this, we see the outlines of a worldview in which the notion freedom of service finds its origin. Origin, however, does not mean here only the historical source, though this too must not be overlooked. The second chapter of Aristotle's Metaphysics has, in fact, and for the first time in Western thought, outlined a connection between the two concepts of freedom and science. Thomas Aquinas, 1500 years later, commenting on this same chapter, formulated the definition of the artis liberalis, from which term, of course, derived the medieval name of the academic philosophical faculty of the arts. And when John Henry Newman, 100 years ago in his book The Idea of a University, by now a classic, spoke of liberal knowledge or a gentleman's knowledge, he explicitly placed himself within this same tradition. Of more importance, however, than tracing the historical origin of the notion, or rather the claim, of the freedom of science, seems to me the truth that would necessarily lose its legitimacy and inherent credibility as soon as it was severed from its origin, namely, from the foundation of that total worldview. Just such a separation, I hold, occurred at the inception of the modern era. This fundamental worldview we are discussing here may even more appropriately be seen as a conception regarding the essence of man and the meaning of human existence. In an attempt to summarize this worldview in a few brief sentences, we might state the following. First, Even though man is on the whole a practice-oriented being, dependent on the ability to make things of this world serve his vital needs, nevertheless his true enrichment does not derive from the technical exploitation of nature's wealth, but rather from the purely theoretical cognition of reality. Man's existence becomes more fulfilled the more he can explore and understand reality. He actualizes his essence in the purest form whenever he acts as a knowing being, so much so that even his final perfection and fulfillment will consist of an act of cognition. Life eternal is called a contemplation, a visio. This is not at all a specifically Christian and theological notion. It can also be found in Aristotle. Anaxagoras states this in his own manner when to the question, "To what purpose are you in this world?" he answers, "To behold the sun, the moon, and the sky," presumably speaking not about astronomy, but rather about the order of the world as a whole. Second, whenever man engages in the pursuit of theoretical cognition, he most eminently does what he himself most intimately and authentically wishes and desires, in which really consists the notion of freedom to do what you yourself want to do. Consequently, not only would we consider all true knowledge free, the more so, the more it is theoretical knowledge, but also man himself is all the more free the more he engages in the pursuit of theoretical knowledge aimed at the truth and nothing else. Common experience confirms this. Whenever someone contemplates reality in pure pursuit of knowledge and without regard for immediate practical purposes, whenever someone, oblivious of possible usefulness, disadvantages, danger, or even death, is able to say, "So it is, this is the truth." Example, "The emperor has no clothes." Then we witness, in an eminent degree, human freedom in action. To set us free, this power, according to a venerable pronouncement, is inherent in the truth. This has been formulated continuously and ever anew in the history of Western thought. Martin Heidegger, too, speaks within the context of tradition when he sees the very essence of truth anchored in freedom. Third, there exist degrees of cognition, and so also degrees of freedom gained in cognition. The highest degree would be realized should our cognitive faculties completely grasp their proper and perfect object. At the same time, there would be attained the highest degree of freedom. Man would do in a most perfect way what he essentially desires to do. We are speaking in a conditional mode, for this ultimate goal can never be reached during man's corporeal and historical existence, even though it sustains the dynamic drive of this same existence throughout. This is the meaning of Aristotle's statement that the quest aimed at the foundation of reality, as such, is a question always open and raised anew throughout the past, in the present, and for all time to come, to which Thomas Aquinas in the Middle Ages added this profound commentary, precisely because the answer can never be within our complete disposition. We pursue such wisdom for its own sake. This implies also regarding the final and definitive answers given by the exact sciences that we do not really and fully explore these answers for their own sakes, as if they would contain their meaning entirely and perfectly in themselves. At this juncture, I believe something very decisive has been stated about science in the strict sense of the word. The exactness of its answers notwithstanding, it does not represent the highest form of knowledge. With regard to freedom as well, it occupies some middle ground, assuming almost a certain ambiguous position. We see this in two respects. 1. Should man limit himself to scientific knowledge in the strictest sense, he may incur the danger of losing his openness for the really unlimited object of his cognitive faculties. In other words, there exists a specific form of mental bondage springing from an exclusive deal of strict science. 2. It does not fringe upon the nature of science to be employed for purposes other than its own pure reasons. No injustice is done when science accepts tasks belonging in the field of practicalities, be it the field of politics, of economics, of technology, or of the military. Science does not come to an end with this, while philosophy, being concerned with reality as such, with the essential object of all cognition, pursued for its own sake, yes, philosophy would be destroyed eo ipso by such servitude. It may seem at times that it is made to serve, but what is thus pressed into service is no longer philosophy. In science, too, in its innermost core, there is the same way an element that cannot be taken into service. This is the philosophical element of the theoria. directed toward the truth and nothing else. This means that science, by its nature, has claim on freedom on account of its being theoretical, not practical. This now is the quintessence of our reflection so far. The freedom of knowledge is intimately connected, is even identical with the latter's theoretical character. Those who infringe upon or destroy the freedom of science can do so only by infringing upon or destroying the theoretical character of science. But the reverse also holds true. Those who renounce the theoretical character of their quest for knowledge or declare it of no consequence in view of practical considerations really abandon all possibility of justifying the claim that science must be free. We find ourselves in this rather strange situation in consequence of certain theses proclaimed at the beginning of the modern era, and since then made an integral part of modern thinking. Admittedly, such theses did not appear without some legitimate reasons. Nevertheless, we may still consider them false, or at least in need of correction. More specifically, I am thinking of the statement in Descartes' Discours de la Méthode. The place of the old theoretical philosophy should be taken by a new and practical approach, so that we may be empowered to become the masters and proprietors of nature. Per lequel nous pourrions nous rendre comme maîtres et puisseurs de la nature. Sorry for butchering the French. This thought reappears almost verbatim in the theses of American pragmatism, that all human knowledge within the framework of the intellectual enterprise should be seen as an instrument only, that the purpose of all intellectual efforts should be to safeguard our life and the enjoyment of life, and above all, that philosophy basically purports not to gain knowledge of the world, but to find ways to dominate it. Let me quote a third thesis. Any scientist who concerns himself with abstract problems must never forget that the purpose of all science consists of satisfying the needs of society. Probably, nobody will contend that there is any essential difference between Descartes and Dewey's theses, and the latter quote, culled, not without mischievous intent, from the great Soviet encyclopedia. All these statements obviously deny the theoretical character of knowledge. Incidentally, if you approach reality with only the intention to become master and proprietor, you are entirely unable to look at the totality of the world and the essence of all things in a purely theoretical manner, interested in truth alone and nothing else. But freedom as well has become impossible. More precisely, it has become impossible to defend this freedom with convincing arguments, Science, in the totalitarian worker states, finds itself constantly pressed to answer the inquisitional question as to what it contributes to the 5-year plan. This is nothing else but the strictest consequence of Descartes' statement about the philosophy of the maître et puisseur de la nature. The specter of a certain extreme possibility is arising here, a possibility, it seems, no longer entirely foreign to our experience. It is the knowledge of truth, indeed, that sets the human mind free, and once this conviction is lost or forgotten, then it may happen that the very notion of freedom appears to our thinking dubious and vague, even incomprehensible. I do not know any more what it means. Thus we read with dismay in the final notes of Andre Gide the entry, there are thousands who are willing to sacrifice their lives to bring about better conditions for this world, more justice, a fairer distribution of temporal goods, and I hesitate to add more freedom, because I do not clearly know what this means. Yet the question how to interpret this enigmatic remark will remain unanswered here. My sole aim was to show that the notion freedom of science springs, perhaps unexpectedly, from very deep roots indeed, and that the radical challenge we have to face nowadays demands a defense aware of these roots. There's a memorable statement spelling out in touching terms these roots that constitute the ultimate freedom of the knowing mind. The statement is memorable above all because of the man who uttered or rather wrote it, and also because of its exceptional circumstances. The man in question is an eminent representative of Western thought and culture. He was of Roman stock, received his education in Athens, and then, at the court of a German prince, tried to hand on the wisdom of antiquity to the upcoming era. Boethius. And the circumstances? A prison cell. The incarcerated Boethius, awaiting his execution, assures himself of his ultimate indestructible freedom, stating, "The human soul in essence enjoys its highest freedom when it remains in the contemplation of God's mind." And that, my friends, is what led me to to researching Boethius and seeking out the book, The Consolation of Philosophy. So, I don't know, shall we read Plato next? Or shall we read Boethius?